In this tutorial, we'll be talking about Python lists, how to use and manipulate them effectively with the 11 methods that comes with the Python standard library. Now, before I start this video, I want to make mention that I have timestamp linked in the description below. So if you're not a beginner and you need a quick refresher on some of the concepts that the Python list object gives to us, feel free to look through the timestamp and make yourself comfortable. But if you're a beginner, I want you to stick with me whilst we learn and practice some of the best and effective way to use the Python list and also how to manipulate them with the Python 11 list methods. Now, before I start, let's look at the definition of list. What is a list? A list is a data structure that holds an ordered collection of items. A list can also store a sequence of items, and also a list can be created by placing all the items in a square bracket, separating them with a comma. We can create a list in two ways. First, using the square brackets, and secondly, we can use the Python list function that comes with the standard library. Now, I have a list A that contains nothing. So I have list A using the square brackets, and when I print this list A, I see that it has nothing inside this list. So when I run this list, we see that this list is an empty list. Secondly, let's use the Python list function to also create an empty list. We'll create a list called list B, and also use the list built-in function. That is this. And when you also print this list B and run it, we see that we also have an empty list. Now, to check that indeed this is a list object, let's run the type function on the list B to see if it is a list indeed. So now I'll run the print function, type in the type function, and also pass in the list B inside this function, so list underscore B. And what is going to happen is that I'm going to have a class of list. So this attests to the fact that this list B is actually a list that contains nothing. Now, I want us to also create a list with integers, because we said a list can contain an item that we should separate them with commas. So now let's create a list of integers. So creating a list of integers. Okay, integers. So over here I'll have a list called numbers, and what is going to happen is that I have the square bracket and I'll just put in 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 and 9. Now, what is going to happen is that when I print this list that is called numbers, what I'm going to have is that I'm just going to have this numbers placed in this list successfully. Now, also let's use the inbuilt function list to also create a list of integers. So I'll rename this numbers variable to number 1, and what I'll do is that I'll just use the list function that comes with the Python standard library. So I'll have to put a square bracket inside, and I'll create 1 2 3 up to 9. Okay, 7 8 9, like what we did at first. Now, when I also print this numbers 1, I'm going to have also a list. Okay, let me also create a list of names. Okay, so now here I'm going to have a variable name called names, and what I'm going to use is that I'm going to use the square bracket, and I'm going to have my first name is going to be John, and my second name is going to be Jake. Okay, Jake. My third name that I'm going to have in this item is going to be Drake, and also my final list that I'm going to add to this item is going to be called Sam. Now I have successfully created a list of names. Now I can use the print and call the list the variable names, and when I run it, I'll see that down over here I have a list of names displayed successfully to us. Next up on what we have on our what to learn is how to add item into a list, and we saw by storing a list, we can store integers, numbers, or list itself, and as well as dictionary inside a list. Now what I'm going to do next is that let me show you how to index in list. So next up we're going to look at how to index. Okay, so indexing in Python in general. So Python indexing in Python. Now indexing is also known as counting. So in Python we start counting from 0. So let's take a look at this list of names. Now we have 4 items in this list. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. But when we want to index them, or when we want to count them in Python, we have to start counting from 0. So the John, we start counting from 0, 1, 2, 3. Now when we start indexing from 0, the item reduced by 1. So if the item is 4, it becomes 3 because we've started indexing the list from 0. Okay. Now, by indexing, I can also use the indexing to grab the first item in the list. Now, and what I can do is that I can write the variable name, that is names, and I'll use the square brackets and I'll pass in the index of what I want to grab. So here I want to print the name John. So if I want to print the name John, what I can do is that I can call the variable names, use the square brackets, and also pass in the index or the position of the value that I want to grab, or the list item that I want to grab from the list of names. So now when I run this code, I will see that I have John printed successfully over here. Let's also try and grab the name Drake. Okay, so I'll write the names variable, use the square brackets, and let's start counting. So we have 0, 1, 2, meaning that Drake is at the index position of 2. So now when I pass 2 here and I also run this code, so the print is not spelled correctly. When I run this code, we see that we have Drake over here. Now, how do we also access? One can ask, now that we've learned about how to index a list, how do we also access them? So we can also access the list by also using the square brackets. So here we try to also access the first item in the list by using the square brackets and passing in the index position of that item in the list, of which we have demonstrated over here, learning about how to index it. So here we start counting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. These are the index position of the various items in the list. Now next up is, how do you also access an item in the list? Like I said, we access an item in the list using the square bracket. So I'm going to have a comment here by saying accessing an item, okay, an item in a Python list. Now by accessing, we also use the square bracket to also access. So now let's create a new list let's create another list, okay, a new list containing jobs. So I'll have a variable name called list of jobs, and over here jobs, okay, not so jobs. And over here what I'm going to have is that I'm going to have a list of jobs, and my first job title is going to be data science. Okay, so data science. Second up on the list is, I'll write web developer. Okay, so we have web developer, and the third item in the list is going to be a hacker. Fourth is going to be an ML engineer. So that is the items that we have in the list. Now I can use the print function to print this variable called list of jobs, and I'm going to have the items in the list. So I'll have list of jobs. So that is, I'm going to select the list of jobs, and when I print it, I'll have this list of jobs containing 0, 1, 2, 3 items, but in actual sense it is 4 items in this list. Now let me try to access the first item in the list, that is the data science. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to use the print function, call the list of jobs, use the square brackets, and pass in the index position 1. And when I run this code, I'm going to see that we have the index position 1 holds a value or an item called the web developer. So this is what Python has successfully printed over here. Now let's also access another item in the list. So let me call the list of objects, the list of jobs. I also use the square brackets, and I also pass in the third item in the list, which is the ML engineer. So this is how to access an item in a list. Now next up, let's talk about list mutability in Python. Now like I said, Python list can contain different type of data, and if we create a Python list, we can change it, or we can modify the list at runtime. So we can modify this list by using the square brackets, or we can use what you call the append method on the list object. But first of all, let's look at how to use the list, the square brackets to author changes into the Python list. So here I'm just going to use this same list of jobs, and what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to change the third item in the list, that is the ML engineer. By changing, I mean author changes in this list. Okay, so what I can do is that I can use the square bracket. So I'm going to call the list of jobs, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use the square bracket, and I'm going to pass the index position of the ML engineer in the list of jobs. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to change it to AI engineer. Okay, AI engineer. And what is going to happen is that when I print this list of jobs, we will see that the list has been altered, or the list has been modified. List of jobs. When I run this code, we will see that the third item in the list has been modified successfully. Now we can also modify the second item in the list. So I can also call list underscore of jobs. Okay, and what I can do is that I can access the second item in the list, and I can also change it to what we call, let's say, a mobile, so mobile app developer. That is what I can call it, mobile app developer. And now when I equally print this list of jobs, what is going to happen is that I'm going to see that these changes has been altered into the list. So now we see the changes has moved from hacker to a mobile app developer. So this is how we can also modify the list item in Python. Now let's look at also how to slice an item in Python. So now slicing is being able to select a sub element from the list object. So now let me demonstrate how to slice. So I'm going to have a comment here and saying that slicing in Python. Okay, slicing in Python. And what is going to happen is that when we want to slice an item in a list object, we can equally use the square brackets, but what is going to happen is that we need to pass some parameters into the square bracket, and I'm going to demonstrate it over here. So here, when we use the square bracket, we have to pass in a start colon stop and what we call the step. Okay, the step size, how many times you want this to step over. So now let's also use this list of jobs. We see that the current list of jobs, so let me print the current list, the current state of the list of jobs. So we have lists of jobs, and when I print it, we see that when we modify the list, it still stays the same. So what I'm going to do is that I want to be able to grab I want to be able to create a sub element or a sub list from the list of objects. Okay, so I want to create two two item in a list from this list of objects. So what I can do is that I can say that I have the list, let's say, or let me rename it to a new list. Okay, is equal to, I have the list of jobs, and what I want to do, I want to use the square bracket, and I want to pass in the start position. Where do I want to start grabbing this list from? And where I want to start grabbing it from is starting it from the web developer. And we know that the web developer is at the index position of 1. So I want to start it from index 1 to index 3. And now let's see what is going to happen over here. So now when I print the new list, okay, so new underscore list, what is going to happen is that we have only 2 items in the list. But the trick here is that we passed in 1 to 3. So why is it giving us only 2 items in the new list instead of 3 items? Now the trick here is that when the start the stop parameter in the square bracket is the stop minus 1. So when you want to actually grab a particular index, you have to so let's say assume I want to grab from data science to, let's say, machine mobile app developer. What I can do here is that I have to add the third item to the stop so that it will reduce it by 1 and grab the mobile app. Okay, so now it is the start colon stop minus 1. So here what is happening is that if I wanted to grab the AI engineer, what I should be able to add is that I'll add 4 so that we can add the ML engineer. So here we have 1, 2, 3, but we are passing it from 1 to 4 so that we'll be able to grab the last item in the list. So now here we have successfully created a new list using slicing in Python. Also, let me also create another list. So let's call it list 1, new list 1. And what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to create a list that has only one item, and that is the mobile app. So what I can do is that I can call the new list that we created and use the square brackets, and I will say that I want to select only one. So I want to select the first position of this list, which is the mobile app. And now when I print this new list 1, what is going to happen is that I will have a list that has only one item in it, and that is the mobile app. And if we check the type, we use the print function and the type function to check the type of the new list 1. We'll see that it is a string over here. But what I want to do is that let me use the list function to grab it, to change it into a list that contains only one item. So here we see that now it is a list and it contains only one item. Okay, so next I have the ability to store different data into a list. So like I said, a list can store itself, store other sequence such as a string and a dictionary and a tuple as well. So let's look at how to use a list to store different type of data. So I'll have a comment here saying using a list to store different data over here. So now here what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to have what we call a variable called different dff underscore list. And what is going to happen is that I'm just going to create an empty list that has 1, 2, 3, and also I'm going to add names, that is Jake, John, and I'll have a floating point number. So let's say 23.54, and I'll have 67.8, and also I'm going to have a dictionary of only one item. So we have a key name, and we have the value associated to the key as Drake. Now we see that we have used a list to store different data, and now when we print this diff underscore list, we'll see that we have a list that contains different data in that list. So mind you, we can also use a list to store different items in a data. Now next up is how to traverse through a list. Now we can also use the for loop to also traverse through a list, and let's also demonstrate it. So traversing through a list. So traversing so let's say traversing a list, let's say in Python. A list in Python. Now here what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to use this different list, and what I'm going to use is that I'm going to run the for loop on the def list. So I'll have my for keyword, and I'm going to have diff, that stands for difference in the def, the def of list. And what is going to happen is that I'm just going to print this diff, and what is going to happen is that we'll have all the list item in this list listed according to how they have been added into the list. So we see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, Jake, John, 23.45, 67.8, and lastly a dictionary. Now we can also use the enumerate function, of which I have a video linked up in the description below, so you can check out that video too and also learn more about the enumerate function. Now the enumerate function will be able to give us the ability for us to unpack this list object and have access to the index of the object and also the value associated with the object. Let's use the for loop with the enumerate function to traverse through the list. So I also have for the index and also the def in, I'll use the enumerate function over here to and I'll pass in the def underscore list to this, and in the enumerate function I'm going to pass in how the number that the index should use to start the list item. So I'll pass in 1. By default it starts from 0, but I'm going to change it to 1. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have a print statement using a formatted string, and what I'm going to do is that I'll have the index over here. So I'll use a placeholder and I'll call the index, and I'll put a dot in front of the index, and I'll also call the diff inside this placeholder. And when I print this, we will see that we have 1 1 2 2 3 3 4 4 5 Jake, 6 John, and so forth and so on. Now this is how to traverse through a list using the for loop and also using the for loop with the enumerate function. Now next, we can also perform operations on list. So we can use the addition and also the multiplication sign to perform some operation on the list object. So now let's look at how to also use the operation, the addition and the multiplication sign to perform some operations on the list object. So let me have a comment here saying, let's say list operations using addition and multiplication. So this is the addition sign and this is the multiplication sign. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to create two lists. So I have list underscore 1 is going to contain a list of 1 2 3 4, and I'm going to have lists underscore 2. It's also going to have an item of 5 6 7 and 8. And what is going to happen is that I'm going to use this addition sign to join or concatenate these two lists together. And what is going to happen is that the second list is going to be appended, or is going to extend this list 2 to the end of this new of the list 1. So now let's demonstrate it over here. So I have, let me store it in a new variable called so let's have list underscore 3 is going to hold list underscore 1 plus list underscore 2. And now when I print the list underscore 3, what is going to happen is that we see that this two list has been added successfully, and the one that we brought to the left hand side of the addition sign and the right hand side of the addition sign has been successfully merged together. So here we have used the addition sign to merge these two lists together. Now next up, let's look at how to use the multiplication sign to also repeat items in the list. So let me create another item called 0. So I'll have a variable called 0, and what I'm going to do is that I'll have only one item in it, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use the multiplication sign, and I'm going to repeat these items in the list 5 times. So now when I run this code and I print the 0 variable, so let me print 0. Okay, let me print 0. We're going to see that we have 5 zeros inside this list object. Okay, so this is the two ways to perform operations on the list by using the addition and the multiplication sign. Now next up, we have the list methods. So let's now look at some of the list method that the Python standard library gives to us. So first on the list, we are going to look at the append method. Okay, so I'm going to have a comment here, and I'm going to write so the append, okay, the append method over here. Now the append method gives us the ability for us to append an item into the last into the list. Okay, so it is going to append an item to the end of the list. So the append method will append an item to the end of the list. So now let me potentially create a list of subjects. So I have a list of subjects over here. So I have subject is equal to a list that contain math, and I also have science over here, and I have English. Okay, I have English stored inside this list. And what I want to do is that I want to use the append method to add an item to the end of the list. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to call the subjects list, and I'm going to do dot append, not capital, dot append, okay, and I'm going to append Spanish into this list. And when I print this list of subjects, what is going to happen is that we see Spanish has been added to the end of the list. So also I'm going to also append French to the end of the list. So I'm going to append French, and when I run this code, we see that French has been appended. So what is going to happen is that I'm just going to also append Spanish. So I'll have subjects dot, so subjects dot append, okay. We'll have Spanish over here. So I have Spanish over here, and when I run this, when I remove this print statement over here, okay, when I copy it, when I cut it and I paste it here, we see we have list French has been appended, and also Spanish has been appended successfully into the list. So this is how the append method works in Python. We use the append method to add an item to the end of the list. Now next up is what we call the extend method, okay. So let me have a comment here saying the extend. So we have extend method. Now the extend method works like how we use the addition operation on the list by adding them together. So I'm going to copy these two lists over here that we demonstrated earlier on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste them here, and I'll change it to 3. So I'll change it to list, let's say 4, and list 5, okay, list 5. And what is going to happen is that I'm going to use the extend method to join or merge these two lists together. So let's join them together using the extend method. So I'm going to call the list underscore 4 dot extend, okay. I'll use the extend method, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add the list 5, and when I extend, it's not intend, so when we add it and we print, now when we extend this list to the list 4, what is going to happen is that we should be able to print the list 4 to see the changes. So I'm going to print list 4, and we see that we have used the extend method in Python to merge these two lists together. Next on the list is what we call insert. So the insert method also help us to insert an element to a given position. So it helps us to insert a given element at a given index in the list. So let's look at the insert method. So insert method. So now the insert method, what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to have a list of grades, okay, a list of grades over here. So I have a list of grade printed over here, and what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to insert another grade into a specific index. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to call the grades dot insert, so insert, and I'm going to pass in an index. So we know that we start counting from 0. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and now I want to insert my elements at the index position of 0, and I'm going to insert the value of 100, okay. So now when I print this grade list, what is going to happen is that we see that it has pushed this value 87 to the next indexing position, and it has replaced this 100 there. So we see that when we insert at a given position, Python list will shift the item depending on where we put it. So if we put it at index of position 2, it is going to shift the item that was currently at index position 2 to index position 3, and it will insert the new item there. So here we see that now the 87 is at index position 1, and the 100 has been inserted at the index position 0. Also, let's look at the count method on the Python list method. So we have count method, okay. We have count method. Now the count method should be able to count certain occurrences in the list. So here I'm just going to also have another list of grades, which is grade 2, and we see that we have a certain value repeating several times in the list. So what I'm going to do is that if I tell my Python list method, which is count, to count the value of 77, let's see what it gives back. So print, and I'll have grade 2, okay, dot count 77. When I pass 77 here, we see that we have a value of 5. So let's count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, but in actual sense it is 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's also count the 55. So let's have grades, okay, 2 dot count, and let's count 55. So we see that we also have 3. 1, 2, 3. So this is how we use the count method in Python to count certain occurrences of an item in a list, okay, or to know how many times an item is appearing in the list. Now let's also demonstrate another example by having a list of objects, subjects. So I have subject 1 over here, and what I want to do is that let me copy these two prints. Let me reverse it, and let me copy these two prints values over here, and let me change this to subject 1, and let me also change this to subject 1. And I want to count the occurrences of math, okay, math, and I want to also count the occurrences of science, okay. So we'll see the occurrences of math and science in this list. So we have 3 occurrences of science, of math, and we also have 2 occurrences of the science the science subjects in the list of subjects. Now next up we have the pop item. So the pop item is going to equally remove an item at the end of the list. So now there is a relationship between the append and the pop item. Now the append method will add an element to the end of the list, and the pop method is going to remove an element from the end of the list. So now let me reuse this subject 1 and change it to subject 2. Now what is going to happen is that I'm just going to call the subject 2, okay, the subject 2, and what is going to happen is that I'm just going to run pop on it. So pop just like that, and now when I run this code, we see that pop has been removed from it, but it actually retains the item that has been removed. That is why you see a value over here. So now when I print the value of subject 2, we'll see that we no longer have science, the last science in it. Equally, when I run the pop several times over here, okay, so let me copy the pop and paste it several times over here. So let me redo it and paste it several times over here, and we'll see that when we run this code and print this, we see that these items has disappeared. These last 3 items has disappeared from the list, and we are using the pop method. Now the pop method also can accept a parameter or an argument, that is the index that you want to pop. So equally, I can also call the pop and pass in the index of 0, and when I run it, we'll see that the math has been popped out. So when I copy this print function and I paste it here and I run it, we see that the first math item has been removed from the list. So we can pass in an argument of the index that we want to remove from into the pop method, or we can just use the pop empty. We don't have to pass in anything. So we can pass in an argument or choose to leave it like that, and when you pass in an argument, it's going to remove that item from that specific index. And when you don't pass in any argument, it is just going to remove the last item from the list. So now next on the list is what we call the remove method, okay. So for the remove method, we can equally call the subject. So let me copy this and also call the subject 1 over here, and what will happen is that I want to remove math. So let me call the subject one. Okay, so subject one dot remove, and I'll pass in a string of the element that I want to remove, which is math. And now when I run this and I print the subject one, what is going to happen is that we're going to see that the first occurrence of the math has been removed. So the remove method, if we have a duplicate of that item that we want to remove, the remove method will just remove the first occurrence of that item in the list. So finally, we next up we have sort. So sort, let me use I have a variable, a nice data over here. So here let me comment so using the sort method. Okay, using the sort method. So now when I paste this here, we see that I have a list of characters. Okay, ZKSAHYP. So now what I can do is that I can call the character variable, okay, and run the sort method on it. And now when I print the characters, I'm going to see that these characters has been sorted successfully in its alphabetical order. Okay, so we have A coming first, H, K, P, S, Y, Z. Okay, so this is how to use the sort. Now the sort can also take in one parameter, which is a value called reverse. So now when I do something like when I paste this here and I pass in a parameter called reverse and I set it to true, what Python is going to do is that Python is going to reverse this list. So when I let me copy this as well and paste it here and run this, we see that now the list has been reversed to its original state. Now initially we sorted it and we have also reversed the list to its original state. Now also let's look at how to also use the reverse to also reverse an item in the list. That is the reverse method to also reverse an item in the list. Now I also have a value over here sorted alphabetically, and now we can run the characters. So character one dot reverse, so character one dot reverse, and what is going to happen is that when I print the character one, okay, so character one, we are just going to have the reverse of this list. Now the last but one method I'm going to look at is what we call the copy. So copy is going to give us let's look at the clear first. So the clear is going to clear all items from the list. So let me call character one or character one dot clear, and let's print character one to see if indeed all the items has been cleared from the character. So character one, and when I print it, we see that the items has been cleared from the list. Now let's look at the last method that we have, that is the copy. Okay, the copy method. Now the copy method gives us the ability for us to duplicate or to have a shallow copy of one list. So let's say I have let's say original list. Okay, so original underscore list is equal to, we have 1 2 3 4, so sorry, we have 1 2 3 4 5. Now we have this list. Now we want to create a copy of this list. So what we have to do is that we can say new underscore list, let's say new underscore list 1 is equal to the original list. And now let's see if these two lists are the same. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to print the ID of these two lists, okay, so that we demonstrate to see if truly the new list is a copy of the original list. So we have list 1, and also let's print this, the ID, okay, the ID of the original list over here. And we see that when we print, we see that these two items has the same ID, meaning that the new list 1 is a copy of the original list. Now let's use the list function to demonstrate how to perform a shallow copy using the list method. Okay, so let's perform a shallow copy using the list method. So now if I want to perform a shallow copy using the list method, what I can do is that I can just do something like the new list 2. Okay, so new underscore list 2 is equal to the original list dot copy. And what is going to happen is that I'm going to have a shallow copy of the original list. And now when I run the list underscore 2, or okay, so let me change it to 2 over here, 2, what I'm going to have is that I'm going to have the same list, but now this is a shallow copy of this original list. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have the list store a multiple item in the list. So we have a list in a list. Okay, so let's have multiple item storing themselves in the list. And now let's look at what is going to happen over here. So now when I run this code, okay, and I also run this code, we see that the new list 2 is a shallow copy of the original list. But here, let's make changes to the new list 1 and the new list 2, and let's see what happens. So I have new list 2 square brackets, and I want to change the first item in the list is equal to a list of A, okay, comma B over here. Now when we run this, okay, let me also print the original list. So the original list, now we see that the new list has been modified, okay, but the original list stays the same. But now what happens when we change an element in that sub list? Okay, now see what will happen if we change an element in the sub list of the new list 2. So let me have another square bracket and also call the first item. And what is going to happen is that I'm going to only change the first character of that sub list. Okay, now when I run this, we see that even though I didn't touch the original list, but I only changed I only modified the new list 2, and now we can see that the original list has been also modified. So this is how to perform a shallow copy using the Python copy method. Okay, this brings us to the end of everything that you need to know about the Python lists, how to use them, and also how to manipulate them using the list, the 11 methods that comes with the Python standard library. Alright guys, if this tutorial was very helpful, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and also hit on the notification bell so that anytime I post content, you'll be able to be notified and you'll be the first to watch my content. Alright guys, see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye.